This week I read an article about Chris Froome reviewing his new Factor bike, and there was a video that he did, and in the video he talks about using disc brakes for the first time, and he said when he was reviewing the bike that he was not 100% sold on disc brakes. So in this video we're going to do a little tech talk about disc brakes. I like to do these from time to time. So I'll read some excerpts of this article. And they basically quoted some of the things that he said. I'm not 100% sold on them yet myself. I've been using them for the past couple of months. So Chris Froome is brand new to disc brakes. He says performance-wise, they're great. They stop when I need them to stop in the dry, wet. They work, they do the job. They do what they're meant to do. He said the downside is the constant rubbing, the potential for mechanicals, the overheating, the discs becoming a bit warped when you're on a descent of 5 or 10 minutes of constant braking. Personally, I just don't think the technology is quite where it needs to be yet for road cycling. So what I want to do is talk about my experience with disc brakes on the mountain side and the road side. And honestly, I agree with Chris Froome on disc brakes for road bikes. And again, I'll share my experience. But you know, the funny thing is about this is Chris Froome is literally at the top of the food chain when it comes to cycling. I mean, he's one of the best Grand Tour riders there's ever been, and he has access to the best of the best equipment. A lot more access than us mortals have. So if he has issues with disc brakes, what does that say about the technology for disc brakes? Now, for the mountainside, I've had no issues with disc brakes. And unless you've been cycling for a really long time, chances are that's all you've known for mountain bikes. I mean, I remember the rim brakes, and the performance from disc brakes today on the mountainside are phenomenal. In fact, I would say today I actually prefer SRAM over Shimano. This is just a little sidebar discussion. I used to be all Shimano all the time. I still like Shimano. I think it just works a little bit better. I think the quality is a little bit better with Shimano, but I really like the modulation with SRAM brakes, and I have SRAM on all of my mountain bikes now. And it's kind of hard for me to switch back and forth between the two. When I go back to Shimano, they have such a grabby feel. It takes me almost a ride or two to get used to those again. Whereas the SRAM don't grab quite as hard in the beginning, but they have better modulation. So that's, again, just a little sidebar discussion. But as far as problems, I really don't have a problem with mountain bike disc brakes rubbing. I mean, yeah, you'll get the contact from time to time. And if you ride through mud and wet, you can hear the rotors kind of scraping a little bit as you get sediment in between the rotors and the pads. But for the most part, mountain bike disc brakes have been fine. In fact, I really like the SRAM, I think they call it bleeding edge technology, where you can bleed the brakes with almost no fluid drip at all. If you do it right, there's no fluid drip. And I'll link a video below where I did a how-to video on how to bleed SRAM brakes. Now, I do prefer Shimano mineral oil just because you don't have to be as cautious about it. The DOT fluid in SRAM brakes is corrosive, and you got to make sure you don't get it on your skin, you don't get it on your bike. And if you do, you got to wipe it off quickly, otherwise it can mess up your paint. So I like the fact that Shimano uses mineral oil. All right, we're getting off into some sidebar discussions here, but let's talk about performance for the road side. From my experience, I've had a lot of issues with, and I've used SRAM on my cyclocross bikes, and now I have GRX on my gravel bike. Now, when I first heard about Chris's problems with disc brakes, I was sure he used SRAM, because the GRX that I have on my gravel bike, Shimano GRX, I've had pretty much no issues with it. Every once in a while, I'll get a little pad rubbing, but it kind of clears up. Again, I think it's just when you get some sediment in there. Maybe I've centered them once since I've had the bike, once or twice over the past, I've had that bike over a year now. No problems. SRAM, on the other side, for the road brakes, I had a lot of issues. I would get the brakes centered, and a week or two later, they would start rubbing it. I'd have to center them. And I use this Bursman tool now. I remember one time in a hotel room on a cyclocross race weekend, I raced Saturday, the brakes were rubbing. Saturday night, I probably spent 45 minutes trying to get those brakes centered. I tried to eyeball it. I did not have this in my bag. I keep this now with me. I did not have this in my bag, so I tried the business card technique, and I think that's where I finally got them centered. But I couldn't do it with my eyes. I would get them centered and then they would rub, and it was, and I think, what Chris said in the article was the constant centering and rubbing. He talked about the pad tolerance being tighter. And I think that's one of the issues with road is it seems like the clearance between the pads and the rotors is tighter. And so you have much less margin for error. I remember one cyclocross race that I did was an absolute mud fest. It was probably one of the funnest ones I've done, but it was slop and mud from the time we started to the time we finished. And I literally, from the first 30 seconds of the race, my brakes, you could just hear it. And it did that for 45 minutes. Now, when I picked up the bike and spun the wheel, the friction was not as bad as it sounded, but still, to listen for that, I even made a video of that race, and maybe if I find it, I'll put it below, but you can just hear the brakes rubbing the entire time. After months and months of, getting the brakes centered and then having them start rubbing again, I realized with SRAM that one of the issues is a stuck piston. And I think those were 2 piston brakes. And so one of the pistons would go in and out properly. The other one was stuck. And you have to unstick them. And I even made a video of that. I'll put that if I find it below. But the piston would get stuck. So they would come out of center. And so again, the road brakes just seem like they're a lot more finicky than the mountain bike brakes. But I want to know from you, what's been your experience with road disc brakes, I should say. What about the mountain bike side? Have you had more problems with road versus mountain like me? I'm curious to know some of your thoughts. Again, I just want to reiterate the fact that, here you've got a professional cyclist, Chris Froome, who is trying disc brakes for the first time in his career, literally, and he's already having problems, and he has access to the best equipment. Now, they are Dura-Ace. I was actually kind of surprised. Again, I thought they were going to be SRAM when I first heard about it, but I'm pretty sure they were Dura-Ace brakes. But, if he has access to the best, what does that say about the technology? I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I think we are going to see improvement. And again, my solution would be work on the pistons to have them retract easier, not get stuck, and then maybe less pad tolerance, less clearance, or more tolerance, more clearance on the road brakes like we see on the mountain bike side, because again, mountain bike disc brakes, I've had no problems. So again, let me know your experience with road disc brakes if you have it, and also mountain bike. Thanks for watching.